Welcome to another 4.3 video. This one's on the new MCP Services tab. So when you first install 4.3, the first thing you're probably going to notice is the dashboard, which I won't get into, but explore this. This is pretty cool. It's a landing spot to kind of see what's going on in the HighByte system. The next thing you're probably going to notice is this MCP Services tab. And if you hit it and you have it enabled MCP, you're going to see this. So this will direct you to settings. And in settings, you want to enable the REST data server and then the MCP server. And when you turn that on and we go back, you're going to see this view. Now think of this as, in 4.3, this is a read-only view of the MCP surface, all the MCP tools and interfaces that we've defined in the product. Now, traditionally in 4.2, if you're familiar with what we did in 4.2 with MCP when we launched it, is you could turn a pipeline into an MCP tool. So in this view under pipelines, you see all of the pipelines that have an API trigger, meaning they're enabled as an MCP tool, in the description of those pipelines. Again, this is a read-only interface, but this saves you from digging through all the pipeline configuration or trying to use grouping to figure out what is MCP, and gives you a central view of what that looks like. Now these are all disabled by default, right? So if I come in and list tools, or connect and list tools with MCP Inspector, there's no tools right now, everything's disabled. But if I click this button, I can go into a pipeline, and what I'm going to do is enable this pipeline. This is the browse interface for the namespace, and I come back and that tool's enabled. I can then go into an MCP Inspector and list tools, and now that tool is viewed, right? So this is my MCP surface. This is a summary of what that looks like. The other thing that's new in 4.3 is you'll see this connections part of the tree. So what we've done is we've added out-of-the-box tooling to certain connection types, specifically MQTT, OPC, and then an MCP client connection, which is net new, and we'll cover that last because it's a little more complicated. These are grayed out, so they're also disabled. But what this means is we now have out-of-the-box tools for these connection types. So I have a connection that's an OPC connection called OPC Kepware. And if I go and I view this is the connection settings for OPC for that connection. Down here I have an enable MCP tools. And if I turn this on, you'll see this is now green. And if I list the tools, you'll see the out-of-the-box tools for that connection. And this is specific to OPC. And those tools, right, are OPC browse and read. So they're really simple. They're more for discovery. So I can browse the OPC address space and I can read the OPC address space. I'm not going to demo MQTT in this case, but it's really similar. I enable it the same way. I can read a topic or multiple topics, and I can browse the topics that are in the broker. These are just discovery tools, right? So they're really useful, quickly enable. You don't have to create a pipeline to get started with these things. We are never going to add out-of-the-box tools for writing data, so these are read-only tools. We think an easy button to go inject data into industrial machineries from AI or machines from AI is a bad idea. You should create those tools yourself and scope them. The other thing is, as you mature, as you kind of grow into more agentic AI, these tools are probably going to be less useful, and you're probably going to want to create your own pipeline tools anyway. For example, if I start up my agent, it's got to browse a million tag OPC server that's backed by a ControlLogix PLC. That's probably a bad way to start, right? That's a lot of data to pull in just to scope and look at particular tags. So I probably want to create a custom tool that scopes that agent to specifically what it's doing. So the first step isn't go browse a million OPC tags in this server. But I'll get off my soapbox. So what can I do with this, right? So what I'm going to do quick just to demo this, and fingers crossed, I think Claude's having a rough day, but I'm going to try to use that because it's convenient. I'm going to spin up Claude that has access to these tools. And while that's spinning up, what you can see is this is my OPC server, right? So I've got a little bit of an address space defined here. And once Claude comes up, we can verify. I've done this already where it's connected to HighByte, and you can see it's enabled those two tools. So I'll say, can you browse and return the root? Let's call them nodes. And what this should do is go use these out-of-the-box tools. So it should call into those. This is where Claude's, I think it's having a downer of a day. But it'll go browse the OPC server, return those addresses. And then I can also make it read. So in this demo, if it did work, I would say go read. Let's try it somewhere else. This is the reality of using these models. it's hit or miss. I hate live demos because then you're totally on the hook. At least record it. I could pause and do it later, but like live demos, it's really dangerous. Um, so you can see it's issuing the browse. I'm on a slower model here, so this is probably so it's just going to browse the root, and it comes back. Right, it comes back with the stuff. So I know there's a system tag under system. There is a system time tag. Can you read it? Let's see if we can get away with this. So it should browse below the system level. I know in Kepware there is a tag under there that is a timestamp. So you see it's browsing the system level, and then from what it finds there, it should create the read calls. It's going to decide to read everything that is a date time, and it's probably going to summarize it. But you can see, click the button, enable these tools, and it can do some interesting stuff. It can go start to browse. It can do the same thing over MQTT. All right, the last time I want to show you is a new connector, an MCP client connection. So what we see is as MCP continues to take off, you're going to have many MCP servers, right, in the factory, because every vendor is going to be adding these things. And what you're now going to want to do is connect your agents to every single, dozens of MCP servers in the factory. It's going to be really hard to manage. So you're going to need gateways, right? You're going to want to aggregate MCP connectivity through gateways. We created the MCP client connection in advance of this because we want to be, or an option for that gateway, so you can govern and audit the use of the tools. So what this means is there's a new connection type called an MCP client, and you can see I just jumped tabs but didn't have to relog in. That's a little Easter egg 4.3 feature that's cool. So I'm connected to this MCP server that's local. What's different about this connection is you're not going to see inputs and outputs, because this isn't like other connections where I'm going to browse and like statically define things. The intention is to be fairly dynamic, right? So we can connect to this local MCP server. In this case, I've launched this MCP server in Node that has access to my whole file system and can browse. Maybe slightly dangerous, but whatever. I just needed an example demo. Don't do it in production. So once this is on, I'll turn this on here, just like the other connections, and I go to MCP Services, you can see these are the MCP tools that are defined in that remote MCP server, but now anybody that connects into me as in this HighByte instance, has access to those tools, right? In the name, we augment the name to make it a unique name in our namespace, but otherwise the tool description and parameters and everything are coming from that remote MCP server. Given the difficulty I just had with Claude, I don't think I'm going to try to demo this one, but you can see these become MCP services in our product as if they were hosted by our product, but we're really just proxying through. So you could imagine, adding, auditing these calls, tagging these so you could permission them to certain agents who will only have access to a subset of these, etc. So you start to govern that through HighByte. Now in 4.4, this view is going to become more interactive, right? So you would actually up here start to define your MCP interface here, descriptions, parameters, all that, and then you will link it to a pipeline. So it's not just going to be scraping pipelines to say these are your tools. You'll start defining your tools here and then link it to pipelines to do the processing. So this will become more interactive. I think too, if we read the tea leaves, we're seeing more emphasis on APIs and server interfaces versus the old, UNS just report by exception and publish thing out to a broker. There's other data patterns in the factories. I think there's a little more focus recently around APIs. So you'll see us add additional servers. You'll see us have like the REST data server will be represented over here with the ability to kind of build out these API services, the MCP services, and govern those as if they're just first-class citizens of DataOps, because they are a really important data pattern that you do want to define, manage, etc., like everything else. But go ahead, give it a shot. MCP services, we're gonna tweak it more in 4.4. But right now it gives you a clear view of everything you've exposed over MCP to your agents, and we'll go from there. All right, cheers.